Professor Kennedy has written 4 books: Interracial Intimacies, Sex, Marriage.
The invitation to be here. It's wonderful to be back. And I had a wonderful time as a student here. There are many very fond memories. And I'm very pleased to see friends and colleagues. And tribal feelings have not been my main reason for supporting Obama, but it's been roiling underneath. There's going to be a brother in the White House. Yeah, and I feel it too. That person did not say that he voted for Obama solely on the basis of racial loyalty. Indeed, he proceeds to say that his messy tribal feeling of racial affinity was not his main reason for supporting Obama. He cited Obama's brilliance, perspectives, and priorities. But this voter did expressly cite feelings of racial loyalty, kinship, and solidarity, because it reflects and nourishes the unreflected racialism, the lackadaisical chauvinism, the complacent racial narcissism that has long befouled American political culture. So what if a candidate looks like you racially? That is no positive attribute that should count as a reason for voting for someone to occupy the presidency. That basically is my position. That's my thesis, and we'll spend just a couple more minutes anticipating a few responses that I've heard and just, talking to people. One response I often hear is this: preaching against racial loyalty is pointless because people are going to be guided by it to some extent no matter what. The election of Obama vividly demonstrates, however, that even deeply rooted attitudes, including entrenched racial notions, can be changed. I mean, after all, Barack Obama would not be president of the United States today had there not been a substantial change in racial attitudes over the past several decades. That a good many people of differing racial backgrounds already view the looks-like-me rationale as illegitimate, moreover, is demonstrated by responses that greeted, among other things, Colin Powell's endorsement of Barack Obama. Several conservatives, most notably Patrick Buchanan and Rush Limbaugh, alleged that racial affinity played a role in prompting Powell to make that endorsement. They charged that Powell supported Obama because the latter, like Powell, was black, and Powell, out of loyalty, wanted to assist his racial brother. The reason this charge was deemed newsworthy is that the sort of racial favoritism alleged to have occurred, a favoritism stemming from racial group loyalty, is widely seen as wrongful. Some observers agreed with Buchanan and Limbaugh and condemned Powell, while others disagreed with Buchanan and Limbaugh and defended Powell for what they saw as a baseless charge. They're fundamentally different historically, sociologically, and normally. Black racial loyalty was called into being by white racial oppression. Black racial loyalty is the defensive adaptation of the besieged racial minority. Black racial loyalty is therefore good and defensible, while white racial loyalty is bad and indefensible. Now, in my view, it's true that black racial loyalty is largely a response to white racial aggression. Does that mean, though, that we should encourage or accept black racial loyalty, particularly in the political sphere? To understand the origins of black racial loyalty does not entail embracing it. To the contrary, it ought to be rejected. Constructing or perpetuating communities on the basis of racial boundaries retards possibilities for the flourishing of a happier, more cooperative, and more creative society. I am not saying that race cannot properly be taken into account. I'm not saying that. So, for instance, imagine a person who says, yeah, I voted for Barack Obama for a variety of reasons, including his race. His race was a plus. And I voted for him in part on the basis of race because I thought it would be a great thing to have a black president of the United States. That in and of itself would send a message to all sectors of American society. It would send a message to white folks, Asian Asian American folks, Native American folks, black folks. It would show that we have really tried as much as we can to repudiate the old-time religion of white supremacy. It would invigorate and inspire marginalized and long oppressed sectors of our society. And so, yeah, I took race into account in casting my ballot. I don't have a beef with that. But that use of race is very different than the one that prompted the comment by John McWhorter. John McWhorter was saying, I'm taking race into account. He looks like me. He's a member of my tribe, my group. That idea and the sentiments associated with it are what I call racial narcissism. In contrast, the person who says, I voted for Barack Obama on the basis of race, sending a signal perhaps to everyone, that's a reason that's accessible to anyone. Any person of any race could embrace that rationale. And it's an outward-looking, public-spirited rationale. It's not parochial.
Hannity, in part because he's a very effective debater, as I've discovered in the past, and in part because we agree on so many things. But because of the nature of what we're doing here, I'm going to emphasize my points of disagreement with him, which should not be taken to say that I have big disagreements. I simply want to give us something to talk about. And my points of disagreement on this caution are of two different kinds. One has to do with data, which I want to talk about for a few minutes. One has to do with the nature of democracy, and I'll get back to the racial issue through talking about that. First, I take the burden of Randy's chapter. It's a very interesting chapter. I look forward to reading the book. The chapter itself would repay a reading. I take the burden of the chapter to be that although black voters turned out both in record numbers and record percentages for Obama, and although that played a big role, as I mentioned in a minute, in his election, nevertheless, it matters why you vote for a candidate. And I think that's absolutely true, to make that very clear, that the fact that there are no legal restrictions, as Randy says in the paper, on why we cast a vote doesn't mean that it doesn't matter why we cast a vote. It matters a great deal why we vote the way that we do. On the other hand, it's not utterly irrational for a black voter to say, I'm going to vote for a candidate who looks like me. Indeed, there might be a lot of relatively attractive reasons, democratic theory, for that, which I want to mention too. That if you buy the theories about democracy, particularly about democratic pluralism, then you think that voters actually have interests that they themselves perceive. And that in trying to work out those interests through politics, they look for, in the candidate's proxy, signals to tell them that this is the one who's more likely to be with me on this set of issues. And so in a sense, what Randy's paper is really disputing is whether race is a really good proxy for anything, or if perhaps it's dangerous to think of race as a proxy for things. To the extent that the paper denies there's such a thing as the black interest, or the black point of view, I entirely agree, and I think that kind of argument is stultifying. It's groupthink implications, dismissals of individuality. On the other hand, I don't think it's irrational for a voter, especially a black voter, given our history, to look at a candidate, look at the candidate's race, and believe this candidate's more likely to identify with me on X or Y or Z issue. I'm not saying the voter is right. Here I mean right in the prediction. I mean it's not irrational of the voter to use race as a proxy. But on the data itself, however, I have a question. I don't think that you can make the case that the reason that Obama won was because he convinced a sufficient number of white voters. In fact, his percentage of the white vote increased just very slightly over the percentage that is of white votes that Democratic candidates typically get. It looks like that what put him over the top is two things. One is the greater turnout of black voters combined with the larger percentage of their votes, which looks like it may have accounted for at least 1 and possibly 2 percentage points, depending on what surveys you look at. These data aren't great, but they're interesting. And second, an enormous surge of support for the Democratic ticket among Latino voters, significantly more than they gave the Democrats 4 years earlier, almost certainly as a reaction to immigration limitations that were very popular in the Republican Party. Those votes had, if the Republicans had picked up the same percentage of Latino votes as they did in the previous cycle, Obama might well have lost the election. I'm not saying he would have, because when you get to that level, the margin of error is too much to tell for sure. But I think there's a fair chance he would have lost the election. But for that was his biggest increase over what the Democrats had done, was his ability to pick up Latino votes. Now, that said, that's not crucial to the paper, which is really not about why he won, but about why we cast votes. And here I want to mention my one other, it's not so much a point of disagreement as a point of slightly different emphasis. I've said and written a number of times, and those of you my students have heard me say this probably too many times, I consider voting one of the least important parts of democracy. There's a lot to democracy, and voting is, to me, almost epiphenomenal to democracy. What is crucial to democracy is democratic conversation, is the co-equal respect for other citizens that leads us to try, although we usually do it badly, to reason together, to argue together, to discuss together about the issues that divide us. What democracy ought to encourage isn't simply going out and getting people to go to the polls, but actually having conversations with our fellow citizens. To the extent that we are able to find ways to encourage that, we're doing democracy well. To the extent that we don't do that, we're not doing democracy well. I think it's pretty plain to all of us that we're not doing democracy very well right now. That in fact, democracy is greatly, I don't want to say it's deteriorated, because I don't want to claim there's a golden age, but it's not what it ought to be, and it seems to be getting worse and not better, that we seem to do dialogue worse, particularly dialogue about issues we're passionate about, or dialogue with people with whom we have strong disagreements. Now, how does this relate to the paper? Well, it strikes me that one of the dangers, perhaps, of using race as a proxy is that it is a proxy of such power, of such finality, that it may intriguingly reduce the possibilities of dialogue rather than enhance them. You can't argue over whether a candidate is black or white. There are people who argue over anything, I suppose. But realistically, it's not a proxy you can defeat. You can argue over whether race is a good proxy for something the voter cares about, but that's a second-order argument. On the argument of whether the person has the proxy, you can't. And when you get to that point, it's enormously difficult to have conversations about democracy. I mean, conversations about the issues, I should say, that are in the election. Last point, because I promised that I will be very brief, and that I too will sit down. I think it's important to distinguish, even if you're a voter who values loyalty and solidarity, it is important to distinguish between voting, as I said, and democracy. I don't mind the racial voting, I think, as much. I think that racial identification is a bigger problem in dialogue. So it's one thing for a voter to say, there's a candidate who looks like me, I'm going to vote for him for president, and so perhaps Obama is elected in part because of that. It's entirely different, as far as I'm concerned, to say, because he looks like me, I'm going to assume his policies are right, and I'm going to support all of them. I'm going to take on faith whatever he says, and because of the color of his skin. That's a very different issue, because there, race isn't a proxy anymore. There you have an issue. It's no longer a proxy for where he stands on something. You know where he stands, and we ought to be free. We ought to want to make up our own minds about that. So whatever role race may or may not play in voting, and even if Randy is right that there's a problem with using race as a sole identifier in voting, it's significant. The problem is significantly worse, I think, if we use race as a proxy, not just in voting, but in actually evaluating questions of policy. If we decide you have to be for it, for that matter, against it because of the skin color of the candidate or representative who proposes it. Thank you.
Again, it's seems to me that the reasons are important. So if someone says, one of the reasons that I'm voting for this person has to do with their race or with their gender, I can imagine with religion, it could be any number of things having to do with someone's background. If the reason is these people have been, this group has been down, and it would be a good thing for them to feel more included. It would be a good thing for them to feel, you know, the elevation of this person is likely to make this group feel that, that they really are part of the polity. And it's a really good thing because it'll make other people view this group differently. Those reasons are fine. I don't have a problem with those reasons. Those reasons are okay as far as I'm concerned. The reason that concerns me, the reason that I'm against, again, has to do with I want this person. One of the reasons why I'm for this person is because I have this person's like me, this person's part of my tribe, this person's part of my race. It seems to me there's a difference between those two. For the man, to go to the gender example that you give, I could easily imagine a man saying, yeah, it's doggone time, past time for a woman to be the chief executive. We think this would have lots of good consequences for gender relations in our society. Anybody, that's a rationale that's open to anyone. It embraces anyone. That's different than the person saying, I'm for this person in part because they are part of my group.
Well, I guess I'm team. Sorry, we went with a black coach. That's a fact. I did. My wife was there. She's here tonight. She can tell you I wrote the team with the black coach. I told her that's what I was going to do. And that's nothing I've always done. The black coach. In the old days when there were no black coach, it was the team with the black quarterback. Then after a while, there were a lot of black quarterbacks, not any black coaches. Then there were black coaches, and so on. I admit that. And why? Is it because I think it's finally time for a black coach? Is it because of aspirations of our people? No, it just felt good. And that's, I take it, what Randy's concerned about. That's a problem. But let me offer at least a partial defense, one partial of that. That is, so let's separate those two reasons. Reason one is this person's like me, everyone in my tribe or group. And you say that's bad reason. Reason two is it's time for this. It's going to be a symbol or a signal of change and so on, and that's why I'm for it. It strikes me that for a lot of members of the group, those reasons collapse. That is, it may be ideal to be able to hold them separate in your mind. I would agree with that. But as a practical matter, I think they collapse. I really do. Especially the more you feel like the outsider, the more they're going to collapse. The more, and so I'm an outsider for football. I didn't have a fair chance to do that, to play football when I was a kid. So I'm an outsider. And I don't feel that way as much as I respect to politics. I think the larger problem is actually, in a sense, the flip side of that, which I don't think happens as often as reps like to pretend, but can happen, which is the part I know you're worried about, which is, well, it's not time yet for this or that to happen. That voter may be a larger problem, I think, than the voter who collapses the tribalism in the sense of it is time.
I quoted McWhorter. There's a big difference between what somebody actually, the words that somebody uses, and what they actually are thinking. I mean, oftentimes we use a rhetoric that we've grown up with. There's our rhetoric that we've been socialized to use, but that rhetoric is actually different than what we're feeling. It could very well be that what he was actually saying and feeling was something that I wouldn't object to, but that he just used a language which I'm reading in the way that I don't like. So that's possible. On the other hand, it's also possible that, and I mean, it seems to me one reason why it's useful to think about this is our thinking is also influenced by the language that we use. And so it seems to me it's important to draw distinctions and to try to press people to, number one, articulate really clearly really exactly what are you thinking, and then distinguish between what's good thinking versus what's bad thinking. On your case, just suppose, so for instance, it's still the case in professional football that there are a couple of black coaches, but there's still very few of them, and we can still remember when there weren't any. Heck, I can still remember the first time there was a black quarterback in the Super Bowl. And I remember, Doug Williams, and watching that game from the first moment to the last, and being absolutely
42-10.
Overjoyed. It was extraordinary. Felt like crying the first two sets, the first two times they got the ball, they didn't do anything with it. Felt really badly, and then he caught fire and felt just great. Fine. Now, what will we say if, so in 20 years, and 30 years, and 40 years, there are a whole lot of black quarterbacks, coaches, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then there's somebody watching the game. You're watching the game at home, and you say, I'm going to size up. I'm going with the one with the black quarterback. Well, I hope so. All right, let's hope. We hypothesize that. So why are you for this person? The owner is black like me. The quarterback is black like me. The coach is black like me. So 40 years has gone past, and he's like me mantra is still there. We've been socialized that, so it's okay to have as part of one's calculus for support somebody being like you. It seems to me that's what I'm worried about. And of course, why am I worried? Well, probably the main reason why I'm worried is what I'm railing against, of course, is part of the reason why, until the last election, there was a white male monopoly on the White House. And, there's still a white male monopoly on many aspects of our society. And to go to one of your points, I definitely don't want to make it seem as though I believe that we have overcome in the United States. No, we have not. It's very important for the point that you made for people to recognize. No, Barack Obama did not win the majority of the white electorate. If it had just been the white electorate, John McCain and Sarah Palin would be at the head of the executive branch of the United States government. It's not as if race is the only thing that prompts people to vote. There are lots of things going on. There are lots of things. I'm not saying that anybody who voted against Barack Obama or voted for John McCain, that race was the only thing. There are lots of things. Religious issues, ideological issues, all sorts of reasons why people vote. Okay. But one reason for the racial demographics of the last election had to do with racial loyalty. White racial loyalty. White racial loyalty had to do with the fact that, you take a look at where was there the most racial polarization within the last election? Where was it? Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, my home state, South Carolina. Not accidental. Not accidental. And not all of that is what people refer to as racial animus. Not all of it, some of it. Some of it, I don't care what's going on. I don't care if it was doggy, if it was a pooch, I wouldn't vote for Obama. Yep, there are some people, that would take that position. But there's some others who wouldn't. No, they wouldn't say that. They would say, I don't have anything against black people. I don't have anything against black people. But, Just clothes. McCain's white like me. I mean, what the heck? And again, the question is, okay, so how do we assess that person? Is that an electoral calculus that we view as good? In my view, no. But if I'm to take that position with the person I just hypothesized, it seems to me I want to ask, why shouldn't I take that position with the black voter who said what John McWhorter said?
But just to continue this for a moment, and if there are other questions, if that's the view, though, then I'm not sure the paper goes far enough. You may concede too much, because just think about that, what you just said for a moment. Here's a voter who says, well, there are all these various issues, it's very complicated, but on balance, one of the things I'm going to take into account that's going to tip the vote the other way is this guy's white. And that bothers you, even though it's just one of the reasons. So it ought to, so what you said in the paper, that you see, you had this phrase, I don't remember what it was, but you want to see if the same, you want to use the same argument for black and for white. It strikes me that in that case, you shouldn't just be against the voter who says, I'm voting for Obama solely because he's black. There's also, if it's a mix of reasons, that kind of tips the balance when...
I do, absolutely. So again, I said McWhorter didn't say that he was voting for Obama solely. In fact, that solely, I mean, people use the solely, very few people make decisions solely on the basis of race. Mark Furman, the infamous Mark Furman, nobody acts that way. It's almost always a mixed bag of things. So I'm arguing, I'm not just attacking the person who's acting on the basis solely of race. That's almost a null set, or it's a very marginal set. I'm attacking using racial loyalty at all. It should not be at all part of the electoral calculus. Let me make that clear.